Hello, bonjour, and yaorana. Welcome to this very first English digital curious tour organized specially for the French New Zealand Chamber of Commerce and its Bastille Week of 2020. My name is Philippe, I'm from Pacific Ventury, and I'm very happy to welcome you in my city, Papeete, the capital of Tahiti. Papeete is not only the capital of this very famous tropical island of Tahiti. Papeete is also a place of history, of diversity, and of stories. The city is a space that has something to tell you. More importantly, the city has questions for you, and that's the purpose of this tour today. So before we start, a few rules for you. Just watch the video, but try not to do it alone. If you have friends and family or colleagues around you, please invite them to sit with you and enjoy this tour. Once you're comfortably seated, no need to take on a plane, the city will come to you. Just watch the video, and once you see the questions coming up on your screen, listen to them. Once you've listened to the question, stop the video and start the conversation with the people around. Once you finish the conversation and answer the question, just press play and continue the tour with us. Now welcome to the city of Papeete. We really hope you will enjoy your tour. I will see you at the end.
The building that you see here is the Komintang School located close to the City Hall of Papeete. The school was set up by the Friends of Free China organization in 1942 as a vocational training center for adults and to teach Chinese and French languages. The history of the Chinese community in Tahiti dates back to the 19th century when several Chinese laborers were brought to this South Pacific island by the American sugar plantation owners. In February 1918, the local Chinese community created the Chinese Nationalist League of Papeete to support Dr. Sun Yat-sen's newly founded regime in China and to participate in the development of the country of their ancestors. The Komintang School that you see here is one of the many ways in which this political group kindled ties with their ancestors. On the wooden walls of this school, you could sometimes see posters of Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek, as well as texts of moral principles from ancestral Chinese wisdom and the new nationalist government. The school nowadays shares its name with the political organization, but it's only functioning as a center of cultural activities. The school nowadays shares its name with the political organization, but it is only functioning as a center of cultural activities such as Mandarin language classes, calligraphy tutorials, and lessons on Tai Chi, a traditional Chinese martial arts practice. This building and all the other buildings of the Chinese community such as schools, social gathering houses, and the Kanti temple are proof of the strong and vivid cultural life of the Chinese community here in Tahiti. There are 3 different kinds of New Year celebrations in Tahiti: the European one, the Chinese one, and the Tahitian one called Matari Nia, reflecting the multicultural dynamics of French Polynesia today. Take a moment now to think about how you deal with diversity in your life. How do you accept differences, and how do you get the most from other cultures to improve yourself as an individual? If you are part of the prominent culture where you live, how do you pay attention to other less prominent cultures and other minority groups? How do you help people feel accepted and become part of your world? The Komintang School is also a symbol of big changes in the history of China. The school was built initially to support Chiang Kai-shek's movement against Communist China. You may recall that Chiang Kai-shek supporters ended up migrating to what is now Taiwan. Yet, this Komintang School in Tahiti is building new ties with mainland China more than its ideological partners in Taiwan. Can you think of how history influences your daily life? How do you think we can influence the course of history, even at a small scale? What can you do to promote reconciliation between communities who've been through decades of conflicts? Before you stands the Parliament of French Polynesia located in Tarahee Square in Papeete. It was built in 1969 in the same place as the Royal Palace of Queen Pomare IV, the second last queen of the Tahitian kingdom. In 1842, a French admiral arrived in Tahiti and forced Queen Pomare IV to sign a treaty, making the islands a protectorate of the French government. This arrangement continued until 1880, when King Pomare V handed over the country to the French government, making it a French territory. The first representative assembly of French Polynesia was created on 31st August 1945 on the wharf facing the waterfront. In the last century, French Polynesia has experienced many statutory laws between 1957, 1977, 1984, and 1996 as the way these territories were seen by the colonial powers changed with time and social awakening. The current status of the Assembly was created under a law from the French Parliament in 2004, extending French Polynesia's status as an autonomous overseas country. The Parliament of French Polynesia has 57 members who are elected through direct universal suffrage. They sit inside the main assembly hall in a hemicycle distributed according to the 5 archipelagos of French Polynesia. The term of the Parliament is 5 years. This building now stands as a monument to French Polynesia's current political status, replacing the Queen's Palace. How important do you think it is to preserve the past? What are some ways in which you can improve your own past, your story, by incorporating new values, new mindsets, and mentalities? You are now looking at the statue of Puvana a Oopa, locally known as Te Metua, meaning the father or the guide in Tahitian. This man became a legend in French Polynesia when he rose from being a humble carpenter to a symbol of emancipation for the Tahitian people. In 1940, during the Second World War, Puvana volunteered to join the Pacific Battalion and chose the side of France Libre of Free France. He led a famous political party called RDPT, or the Gathering of Tahitian People, in the 1970s and served as an elected representative and then senator in the French Parliament. His goal was to lead his country to autonomy and eventually independence, but his movement was curtailed in the interest of French national interest when it began nuclear testing in French Polynesia. In 1959, he was charged for conspiracy by a French court and was put in jail for disobedience and called for riots. He was released from prison in 1966, but it was not until 2019 that the French Supreme Court officially granted him pardon and acknowledged his innocence. Until his death in 1977, Puvana continued to struggle against capitalists and colonialists. He fought for Tahitians to reach high positions in the local administration and for the implementation of social regulations and the restitution of lands to native owners. Our history is filled by prominent individuals, such as Puvana, who influenced or symbolized the change in their countries. Who do you consider is a model for historical leadership? What do you think are the qualities needed to be a great leader? Puvana's legacy continues to this day, and he remains an important figure in the Tahitian society. In your opinion, how important is the role of legacy in leadership? As a leader, how can you be sure people will follow your path? Puvana's historical struggles show how his movement was undermined by political and strategic interests. It took decades to re-establish the truth of what really happened. This has left an open wound in the country today. The way in which Puvana stuck his ethics until his death, how important do you think it is to stick to your own ethics? How do you promote the interests of everyone while preserving the dignity and life of the few? How do you heal wounds from the past and help people reconnect and build trust? In the same square as the Parliament of French Polynesia stands this 300-year-old banyan tree. Under the shadow of its leaves, the Tahitian chiefs used to gather in the olden days. During the colonial era, this tree was a place for social gatherings as well. The famous painter Paul Gauguin was a frequent visitor here. A tree house was also built at the top of this banyan tree where military and other public officers used to meet for drinks. Fun fact, in Tahitian, when you want to talk about the core subject of a conversation, you say te tumu paro, which literally means the trunk of the talk. What are some historical trees and other such landmarks where you live? Do you think there are some places today that will become historical landmarks of tomorrow? The Tarahee Square stands on a piece of land which is an ancestral site for the Pomare Kingdom of Tahiti. This is where big chiefs and fierce warriors from all around the Pacific were welcomed. The group of chiefs known as Hiva were discussing issues of power, governance, adventures, and wars on this site. The square was also home to a marae, Tarahee Pape'ete, but there are no traces left of this sacred space. There is also a stream that crosses this swamp land and leads to the Queen's Bath, located behind the Parliament building. This square has always been a symbol of joy and happiness. In 1878, the then governor built a bandstand, an outdoor performance platform here, and it was used to host concerts every Thursday. The traditional Polynesian dance festival known as Heva used to be organized here but has since moved to a nearby location called Toata. The traditional marae and the bandstand have now been replaced by large parking areas, breaking its link with a long-lasting tradition. In the life of a community, how important do you think it is to urbanize in a way that promotes social bonding? Why is it that for a long time city planners forgot about this connection with traditions and nature? In the southern part of the gardens of the Parliament building, there is a spot where the Veite River comes out. The story goes that back in the day, women and their newborn kids came to these waters to get purified after birth. The Tahitians would collect water in gourds, believing that it was very pure. Queen Emata Pomare IV, who was known to drink only coconut water or water from this river, came here every morning to take a bath, giving this area its name as Queen's Bath. She would stay here for a long time every day as she enjoyed the feeling of the water on her skin. The queen and her courtesans would stay here until lunchtime, passing their time chatting. Because of the quality of the water in the landscape, this river was also an ideal place for waiters to stop and the reason why the queen built her palace close by. Later, British Consul Pritchard, Belgium Consul Morenhout, and the French governor Roua also stayed in the same place. The river water was also used by the official printing house, the bakery, the military barracks, and the hospital. The military also used this river as a natural protection and built fortifications along the riverbed, which slowly reduced the size of the river. When the fortification was destroyed as the city grew in size, the remains were used to reclaim the swamps on the riverbed and to build a road. After these changes, the river became a popular place for women, sailors, and soldiers to come and do their laundry. What are some communal spaces where you live, and how do different groups share these spaces? What is the importance of having such spaces in a city? Across the road from the Parliament stands Queen Marau's house. Queen Marau's parents settled in the land called Pape'ete in 1844 after it was offered to them by Queen Pomare IV, who was the cousin of Queen Marau's mother. The family built this house on the site, but by 1899 the house was so dilapidated that Queen Marau decided to build a new one. Unfortunately, since the death of Queen Marau in 1935, the house is slowly falling into ruins. How important is it for you to know your history and celebrate it? What's your responsibility in preserving history, including the one that you may not relate to personally? By preserving history, how do you raise your own awareness and learn from the past? A short walk away from Queen Marau's house stands the statue of Louis Antoine de Bougainville in the middle of what is now known as Bougainville Park. Bougainville was born in Paris in 1729. At the age of 37 in 1766, he embarked on a voyage around the world with naturalists, artists, and astronomers. He is the first French sailor to land in Tahiti in 1768 on board the ship La Boudeuse, a few months after the English sailor Wallis. He was so amazed by the landscape of the island that he decided to call it the New Cythera, based on the island of Cythera, the birthplace of Aphrodite. Bougainville stayed only 10 days in Tahiti, but the stories he told in his 1771 book, Trips Around the World, contributed highly to the myth of Tahiti and the Polynesian paradise. Upon his return, Bougainville took a Tahitian man named Ahutoru aboard his ship. Ahutoru stayed in Paris for 11 months. Bougainville's writing influenced how the rest of the world saw the Polynesian culture and its people. Movies and other cultural cliches are still framed through his lens. How do you think people who do not originate from a culture promote it to other people? How do you fight biases about yourself and your culture? How can the Tahitians reclaim their culture and make it seen as it is and not through the lens of outsiders? What could be seen as some positive aspects of Bougainville's book? The Puwana a Oopa Avenue is the main street that houses all the major institutions of French Polynesia and the French state. It is home to the ministries of local government, the Economical and Cultural Council, the Tahitian Cultural Academy, the Presidential Palace, the Office of the French High Commissioner, the Court, the Police, and the Gendarmerie, which is the police force working under the authority of the French Ministry of Defense. This avenue used to be named after Armand Joseph Brua, an admiral who was the French representative to Queen Pomare and the one who convinced her to accept a French protectorate. In 2004, after a political shift in the local government, the name of this street was changed to Puwana a Oopa, who you met earlier. What is the importance of symbols such as street names in the understanding of history? Hokulea, the double-hulled canoe from Hawaii, landed in Tahiti in 1976 after sailing for 32 days over 5,370 kilometers between the islands of Maui and Tahiti. The Hokulea Stone, located in Pauphi Park, marks Tahiti's connections with other Polynesian islands and its tradition of sea navigation. This monument comprises of a marae, a traditional stone temple, and close by there is an unu, or a wooden mat that celebrates the famous Tahitian sailor Tupaia, who embarked on James Cook's vessels. The sailing tradition is very important in the Polynesian culture. It came back with a cultural revival in the 1970s. Today, many projects are connecting all the Polynesian islands through traditional voyages, perpetuating an ancestral tradition. How are you connected to your ancestors and the traditions of your culture? What is for you the best way to pass on cultures and traditions to new generations? In times of high technology and global diversity, how do you think you can preserve traditional knowledge? As we end this tour, how do you envision your own voyage into the future by knowing the port you come from and using the winds from the past to direct your canoe in the right direction?
Hello again, this is Philippe. I really hope you enjoyed this very first Curious Tour, and most importantly, I really hope you enjoy discovering the city of Papeete in a very different way. We hope that you enjoyed the tour, and most importantly, we hope that you enjoy discovering the city of Papeete in a very different and creative way. We would be happy to know what kind of conversation you had during this tour with your friends, your family and your colleagues. So please feel free to reach out to us and share with us your experience of this Curious Tour by reaching out to us on our website pacificventury.com or by an email contact@pacificventury.com, and we will be happy to see you again on a future Curious Tour. Thank you. Nana.